Welcome back to Multiple Learning Pathways 101. In this lesson, we will discuss how the brain works in its retention of information and how we can use the multiple learning pathways through the arts to engage with those new ideas and ensure that it is stored in long-term memory. But first, let's take a look at how the brain works. When new information is presented to us, our brain works similarly to a computer, in that we receive input from our environment, process it, and give an output as a choice or a decision. The complexity in which humans do this, however, is what sets us apart from computers. This information processing theory is at the core of cognitive psychology. So, then how do computers save information? They click save, of course. That's how a computer works. Not so much our brains. Why? Because a computer is a machine programmed to process sets of input to produce sets of outputs. Humans, however, cannot be programmed. Yes, the brain and the computer are similar in the basic steps to processing information, but the way they differ is actually much more complex on the human side of things. What sets humans apart from machines is also uncoincidentally the same reason behind why humans are such a dominant species. Intelligence. Intelligence is defined as the ability to apply knowledge to manipulate one's environment or to think abstractly. Remember when we discussed how computers are machines programmed to process sets of input to produce sets of outputs? That means a computer can absolutely apply knowledge to manipulate a result. A computer cannot, however, think abstractly. But humans can. It's the major difference that allows us to have original thought and are unable to be programmed. It's also the reasoning behind why the information processing within a human brain is much more complex than that of a computer. So how do we hit save on our brains? How do we as teachers ensure that the new information we are presenting to our students is processed and stored in the long-term memory? In order to understand how our brains best retain information, you must first understand how this complex human information processing theory works. Humans receive input or take in experiences from their environment. Once we have interacted with new information, it's stored in our sensory memory. How long it's stored there is entirely dependent on the interaction we have with that information. When we first experience our environment, we take it in through, you guessed it, our senses, hence the name sensory memory. You can actually receive a memory or interact with an experience through all 5 senses. However, studies have shown that the visual and auditory pathway are the senses that hold the strongest connection with experiences, and in turn the brain is able to hold on to a visual and auditory experience for longer periods of time. About half a second for visual interactions and 3 to 4 seconds for auditory interactions. This may seem like a really short amount of time, and it is. But remember, in comparison to the amount of experiences your brain takes in through your senses every second, it makes sense that it's only able to hold on to those experiences that gain and require attention at different times. But we have plenty of memories of experiences that happened minutes, days, even years ago. Those are memories that we have stored in our long-term memory. So how do we gain our brain's attention and keep memories of our experiences for longer? Well, once information is presented from the environment, it all comes down to what you pay attention to. Those are the things that get passed from the sensory memory into your working memory, also known as short-term memory, to be processed. However, your working memory has a fairly limited capacity as well. It can hold about 7 items for no more than 20 or 30 seconds at a time. This is also the reason behind why phone numbers are made up of just 7 digits, and why we're able to remember a phone number for just long enough to dial it before it begins disappearing from our memory. Just like the sensory memory uses visual and auditory cues to take in information, the working memory also uses visual and auditory strategies to process the information. In order for ideas to begin to be processed by the working memory, these visual and auditory strategies must work together to create a more connected representation of the new information. Combining those senses leads to a stronger connection with the material. Then, through continued rehearsal and varied engagement and application, the new information will eventually get moved to the long-term memory. The long-term memory can hold an infinite amount of ideas for an indefinite amount of time. It's able to be accessed at any point and the ideas aren't forgotten, kind of like hitting save on a computer. So what does memory have to do with learning? Well, let's take a look at what we have in common here. Visual and auditory are the main point of access to both receiving and processing information. Where the idea being presented is going to be stored is entirely dependent on these two stages. So why does this matter to us as teachers? The ultimate goal of a teacher is to present ideas and information to students and have them be able to retain and apply the information later. Later may mean later on in the lesson or in the course, or later on the school year, or even throughout life. Long term. So how can we make sure that this is happening? Well, most teachers will probably agree that they rarely present a lesson using just visuals or just lectures. Most teachers are already using a combined effort between these two pathways. But how can we make that connection even deeper? And how can we make sure students are actually processing the information effectively enough for it to get stored for the indefinite future? This is where the multiple learning pathways come into play. Allowing students to engage with the material through intentionally varied pathways builds more well-rounded engagement and encourages students to self-reflect on how they learn best. It allows students to experience and interact with the ideas and see them in action. Also, being more dynamic with how we present the information to students furthers their connection with the new information, so that they are able to recall and apply the ideas in different scenarios. These strategies together will strengthen the long-term retention of new information. Utilizing the multiple learning pathways by teaching through the arts requires the students to create and respond through a combination of the different pathways. It takes processing to an even deeper level by giving the process a purpose, leading to further connections and real-world skills. It also allows for students to activate that original thought and creativity by giving them an entry point that piques their interests and ultimately leads to stronger long-term retention.